Alright guys, thanks for joining me. Welcome to my first ever video blog. We're going to try to do this every week and we're going to take a look ahead to each week's sports events and what's the biggest things going on in the sports world. We're going to start with the National Football League this week, of course, the number one topic. The wild card weekend officially over. Four fantastic games capped off by the first overtime game with the new rules between Denver and Pittsburgh. But let's go back to the first game of the weekend, Cincinnati and Houston. The Texans, their first ever playoff game, hosting the Bengals. It was the first matchup ever between two rookie quarterbacks in an NFL playoff game. Andy Dalton really struggled through a bunch of picks. The Texans were able to get the running game going, which they weren't able to do in the first matchup this season in Week 14. Arian Foster really exploded, carried the Texans. I was surprised that Houston scored as much as they did and that the margin of victory was so wide. But I did pick Houston to win that game. I thought that they would be able to control the ball. I thought it would be much lower scoring, but they got a couple of big defensive plays. So that's that for that game. Of course, the second game was a little bit different yesterday, or rather on Saturday. That was between New Orleans and the Detroit Lions. The Saints trailed 14-10 at the half. I thought they were trying to really establish the run in the first half, and the Lions were content throwing the ball around. There was a couple turnovers each way, a couple bad officiating calls on both sides, went against both teams. But in the end, New Orleans was able to really get it going in the second half. Uh, Ended up with a 17-point win. The Lions had a great season, but Drew Brees and the Saints just absolutely unstoppable right now. So I think the Saints are looking good moving forward, and they're definitely the biggest contender to the Packers, the biggest challenger to the Packers in the NFC. They're gonna have to travel to San Francisco this upcoming weekend. The Sunday slate of games featured the New York Giants at home against the Atlanta Falcons. This game was interesting. I thought Atlanta would be able to score more than 2 points, which was only done via safety. The Giants really getting their running game going the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season. Ahmad Bradshaw and Brandon Jacobs both being healthy at the same time has really been a boost for the Giants. Their pass rush is getting to the quarterback just like it did when they went to the Super Bowl a few seasons ago. But I was surprised that Atlanta wasn't able to get the ball down the field a little bit more. Some quick slants to the receivers. The Giants are going to play the Packers next week in Green Bay. It was a close matchup the first time they played in New York, so it'd be interesting to see where that goes. And then, of course, the final game of the weekend, as I mentioned already, was Denver and Pittsburgh. Steelers, big favorites going into the game, even though it was on the road. The Broncos, Tim Tebow, everybody says that he can't throw the ball. I'm one of those guys who doesn't like the mechanics. He hasn't thrown for higher than 50% of his completion rate so far this season. But he got it done in this game. Found some open receivers, got some guys down the field. Even though Wilson Gahey had a big fumble that almost cost Denver, the Steelers made a late comeback, got the game into overtime, and of course everybody who saw the game knows what happened. First play of overtime, there was a big hoopla about the new rules, the playoff overtime rules, and the referee explained it. The teams both looked confused, but it didn't really matter. Denver scored on the first play of overtime to get the upset victory, and they move on. After backing into the playoffs, they move on next week to face the New England Patriots, who already smoked them earlier once this season. So you look at this upcoming weekend's games, you've got New Orleans at San Francisco in the NFC, along with the Giants at the Packers. I'll take New Orleans and Green Bay to win those games. And then in the AFC, you've got Denver going to New England, and you will have, I think, the Patriots being able to uh, maybe put Denver in a hole and make the Broncos have to come from behind early in the game, much like they did the first time they played. So I like New England to be able to win that game. And then, of course, you're going to have the Houston Texans traveling up to play Baltimore. I think the Ravens, with a week off, they can get some guys healthy. I think their running game will be too much for the Texans to handle. So I like Baltimore in that game as well. If you want more information, go to SpadoronSports.com. You get my complete analysis and score picks for each game. Moving along, let's talk about the college football national championship game between Alabama and LSU, a rematch of a game earlier this season. Both teams coming out of the SEC. LSU won the first meeting 9-6. It was a battle of field goals. I expect this time around to be a little higher scoring. I think LSU, their quarterback play is a little bit better than Alabama's. I think LSU's defense is a little bit better. Overall, I think LSU the better team. They're going to have a little bit of a home field advantage playing in the Superdome, just a few hours away from their campus. So I think LSU should be the favorite in this game. Alabama has a lot of experience as well in big games, but I think LSU proved the first time around that they're the better of the two teams. So I'm going to take LSU 20-16, winning the national championship. Moving on to the NBA now. The NBA season's coming fast and furious this season, more so than ever. Lots of games being packed into a tight window. 2 weeks into the season, most teams have played 8 or 9 games already. So, there's a lot going on in the NBA. Trade rumors surrounding guys like Dwight Howard, Darren Williams in New Jersey. Their Nets are trying to keep him happy. Who knows what's going on with him? Lots of movement around the league. Of course, we've already seen Chris Paul get traded coming into this year. So lots of interesting things. Lots of up and coming young teams. I feel this year in the NBA. It seems like teams like the Lakers and the Celtics, um, the Mavericks, the Spurs, teams like that seem to be struggling a little bit. We've got some younger teams they're really thriving. Atlanta's had a tough schedule and they played pretty well. You've got some surprise teams. I think Portland playing a little bit better than most people would have thought after losing Brandon Roy, who was their overall general floor leader for the Blazers. But Gerald Wallace and LaMarcus Aldridge really stepping up their games this year. The Utah Jazz with their young core players, Derek Favors, Devin Harris, Al Jefferson, guys like that, they're off to a pretty decent start. The Indiana Pacers, after acquiring David West, Darren Collison starting at point guard, the Pacers are having a fantastic start to the season. And then, of course, if you had to pick maybe the most surprising team, being the Philadelphia 76ers, currently in first place. They're 5-2 record heading into the week. Doug Collins really got his team playing well. Evan Turner having a better season off the bench this year, the number 2 pick last season. So Philadelphia, Indiana, Utah, and Portland, I'd say, are the 4 biggest surprise teams so far in the early season. Looking ahead this week's schedule of games, rather, I've got my schedule right here. I'd say your best games for Monday night, you're going to go with the Indiana at Philadelphia. Should be an interesting game. As I mentioned, both teams off to good starts. New Orleans going to play at Denver. The Hornets kind of struggling right now. Eric Gordon was a big centerpiece of the trade for Chris Paul, and he's been injured. So New Orleans is starting to struggle a little bit, but it should be a high-scoring, fast-tempo game between the Hornets and the Nuggets. Tuesday night, 3 pretty good games. You've got Oklahoma City playing at Memphis, 2 young teams on the rise. You've also got the Clippers playing out in Portland, of course. Lob City, as they're calling the Clippers now. Chris Paul and Blake Griffin playing against Portland, who, as I mentioned, off to a great start with LaMarcus Aldridge and Gerald Wallace. And then also on Tuesday night, you've got Miami playing out at Golden State. LeBron James, Dwayne Wade playing against the young core players. So Golden State, Monte Ellis, and Steph Curry. That should be an exciting game. Wednesday night, quartet of pretty good games. You've got Atlanta playing against Indiana. Dallas is playing in Boston. 2 teams really struggling right now. Orlando's going to play in Portland. And then Miami will play against the Clippers. Thursday night, really only 2 games to talk about, both on TNT. You're going to see the Knicks play in Memphis and Orlando play in Golden State. 4 young, exciting teams with star players and getting up and down the floor. Really exciting games to watch on television. And then the rest of the schedule would be on Friday. You've got Chicago playing Boston, 2 of the favorites in the East. Portland playing at San Antonio, and then Miami will be playing at Denver. Saturday, 2 pretty good games to talk about. The Knicks will be playing at Oklahoma City. Interesting to see Carmelo Anthony and Kevin Durant go head-to-head. 2 of the probably the 1 and 2 purest scorers in the league, best shooters in the league from all over the floor. And then, of course, you will see the Battle of Los Angeles as the Lakers will play the Clippers. Kobe Bryant and his boys going to play Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. Should be a good showdown between the Lakers and the Clippers. Let's talk a little NCAA basketball now. We're just talking about the NBA and NCAA hoops in full swing. Conference play is underway. Right now, everybody always just assumes that the Big East is going to be the strongest conference because, they have the most teams and they have some of the highest quality names like Syracuse and UConn and Pittsburgh and Villanova and Georgetown and Louisville and things like that. But, if you really look at the Big East right now, I think they're kind of struggling. Villanova's not anywhere near where they're supposed to be. UConn really hasn't beaten anybody great, even though Syracuse is #1 in the country. They've kind of had a soft schedule so far. Really, have only had one or two test games so far this year, but of course they're undefeated. So the Big East, right now, I think I think the college basketball landscape is definitely more spread out this season. I think the Big Ten with teams like Michigan State, Michigan, and Indiana, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Purdue. I think that's very tough conference. Illinois also in there. I think the SEC with teams like Florida and Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Alabama, Mississippi State. I think that's a pretty balanced league. The Pac-12 kind of struggling. UCLA was a preseason favorite. They're kind of off to a slow start, although they've won their last 2 games heading into the week. Arizona, Cal, Oregon, Stanford, Colorado. They're probably all about the same. Pretty much all about the same in the Pac-12. The ACC is usually just a 2-team race. You look at Duke and North Carolina, but Virginia playing very well to start the season. They're off to a good start. They're in the top 20 right now. So, college basketball, I think it's much more even. I think the Atlantic 10's a pretty good conference again with teams like St. Joe's and Xavier and Richmond and Dayton. I think it's very well spread out this year, and there's no actual dominant conference. Looking ahead to the week in college basketball, let's talk about your key games. On Monday night, the best games are definitely going to be West Virginia at UConn, a Big East battle. West Virginia coming off a big win over the weekend over Georgetown, and UConn falling to Rutgers. So, like as I said, the Big East, very turbulent teams, kind of up and down, and really struggling against some lesser opponents. On Tuesday night, a pair of good games, and the Big 12, you've got Baylor and Kansas State. Should be up and down. Both teams like to get up and down the floor, but 2 pretty good defensive teams as well. So it should be an interesting matchup there. Also in the Big Ten, Ohio State's going to go on the road to Illinois. A good road test for the Buckeyes. They've already lost at Indiana this year, so we'll see how they handle going. Take another road trip out to Illinois. The Wednesday night schedule is not so great this week. Thursday night, that makes up for it because there's a bunch of good games. You're going to have Virginia at Duke. We already talked about the ACC and how Virginia's trying to step up with the big boys there. You've also got Wisconsin and Purdue playing in the Big Ten. Out in the Pac-12, you're going to have Colorado playing at Cal. That could be a battle for first place in the conference. And then a mid-major game, although I don't really consider these teams mid-majors. And the West Coast Conference, Gonzaga playing at St. Mary's. The two top teams probably in that conference, although BYU is making the West Coast Conference much more interesting this year as well. Saturday, you're going to see a good SEC battle between Alabama and Mississippi State. Mississippi State having some struggles with some of their players, getting into some trouble off the court, and then on the court, they're coming off of a tough loss over the weekend. You're going to see a good Mountain West battle between UNLV and San Diego State. 2 teams ranked right now, and both have some impressive victories on the season. Of course, everybody remembers UNLV beat North Carolina to start the year. And then out in the Pac-12, another big game, Oregon playing Arizona. Again, 2 teams right in the thick of things in the conference race, and should be a battle for one of the top spots and maybe one of the possibly only 2 or 3 spots in the NCAA tournament. So this is going to be a big game. Sunday, one pretty good game, and that's in the Big Ten Conference. That's Indiana playing Ohio State. The Buckeyes already traveled to Indiana once and were beaten, so this could be a revenge game for Ohio State and Jared Solinger trying to get a marquee conference victory. Well, that's all the time we have for this week's video blog. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a comment. Subscribe to John Brockway Sports right here on YouTube. And until next time, I'm John Brockway.